Hi, everyone. This is Ken Magdaleno. I'm the founder and CEO of CLEAR, which is the Center for Leadership, Equity, and Research. And I want to thank you for being here this evening. A little bit about CLEAR before I introduce our speaker. CLEAR is in its 11th year now. We have been around, mostly around the Central Valley, but now have expanded into the rest of California. Our areas of interest are really, or activism, are really leadership mentoring, equity, and that includes cultural proficiency, as well as different areas of social justice that we address. And then in research, we have a journal, an index journal for those of you that are in higher education. It's an index journal. All of this information you can find on our website, www.clairvoice.net.com. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker this evening. Sheri and I met some time ago, actually, when I was at the university. And it's only been in the last year that we've had more than a couple of discussions. And I think you're going to enjoy what Sheri has to provide. Sheri is the founder and CEO of Indigo. And rather than hear me talk, let's get to Sheri and get ready for a wonderful webinar. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Ken. Well, welcome everyone to Uncovering Hidden Biases and Motivators. As Ken said, I'm the founder and CEO of the Indigo Education Company. We started this company in 2013, really with the vision of bringing the idea to education that every student, every educator, every person really has an intrinsic genius, was born for a purpose, and matters. So we do assessment technology, curriculums and trainings around self-awareness and human development. So that's kind of what we do, and we have a focus on career development. And a little bit of the assessment you're going to be experiencing today is our latest product that we built during COVID through our nonprofit to really support all of the folks that are unemployed or even in the Great Resignation, who are in between jobs. Maybe some of you are even in between jobs. But we're going to talk about it from a equity lens because of the work that CLEAR does. I just love the social justice work that they do. And this is a little bit of a different twist on equity with thinking about it from the lens of motivators. So I'm going to share my screen here. I'm not actually allowed to share my screen.
Is Luke doing that for you?
I think he's gonna let me now. Yes. Okay. All
There you go.
right. I'm gonna start from the slideshow. All right, and feel free if you have any questions for me or throughout the presentation to raise your hand. I think we can do that on the webinar, or to pop a question in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'll be able to see all of those. So please don't be shy. I want this to be interactive, and I love to hear from folks. In fact, I'm hoping to hear from folks in most of this presentation, not just talk at all. So the session agenda, we just did the welcome. I'm going to give you a little bit of overviews on the different motivators that we measure here at Indigo. Then we're actually going to take a pause for 10 minutes and actually you have a chance to take the IndigoPathway survey if you want. I really recommend that because it'll help you know what your motivator scores actually are. And when we talk about the different biases of the motivators, it may be useful to you, and plus it's actually really fun to do, and so we'll have a little bit of time for that, and then we'll discuss the 6 motivators and how that may reflect hidden biases, and then we'll have Q&A at the end and share out our takeaways, and maybe even get out of here a little early because I'm actually on the East Coast right now. I'm in Washington, D.C., and it's pretty late here, so that's the agenda. As I said before, at Indigo, we really believe everyone has a purpose, and we also really align with Dr. Todd Rose at Harvard in believing that there are no average people. Everybody is unique. And I think one of the difficulties of the education system as we see it is this idea that everyone has to fit in the same box. And a lot of times people are measured against very similar standards. And I really like this cartoon because I think it conveys the insanity of measuring, all humans and, even ourselves, the way we think about ourselves, by a somewhat arbitrary assessment. So this guy is saying, everyone has to take the same exam, please climb that tree. And so, just looking at this cast of characters here, who do you think might actually win the exam?
A monkey.
Yeah, the monkey, or who else?
The man.
The man might, yes. Actually, people don't notice the little bird over there on the bottom left. And it's funny,
Yeah.
I used to show this to kids a lot. And, traditional Western-minded kids would always say the monkey. And then when we did work on the Navajo reservation, they all said the bird. It's like they really got it right away. And I found that really interesting. Marco, thank you for saying the bird. So I think the thing that this really points out is this whole idea that, first of all, even knowing that even we're like clearly biased towards some animals have, advantages to doing this type of test, but even there we totally missed the bird because he's small and he's over there. We didn't really notice him. We didn't think about flying. We thought about climbing, right? Because it says, please climb that tree. And the bird can fly up the tree. So even that is a really interesting way to start thinking about equity and biases and this whole idea that whenever we're measuring someone by the same standard, you're not really doing justice to the diversity of humanity and the fact that we're all created for different reasons. So Rawl said, would the same thing hold true of the state testing concept? With that, do you mean that by the state test doesn't really give us an accurate depiction of all the talents and gifts, or really accurately reflect who people are? Is that what you mean? Standardized testing? Yeah. I actually agree with that. I feel like standardized testing is very limited in what it really shows us about our students and their gifts. I think it's a really limited way to measure success. Okay. So Luke, can people talk in the webinar or no? Completely agree, and I work with standardized testing. Thank you, Mary.
If people hold up their hand, we can allow them to talk if they'd like to.
Okay, good to know if anyone wants to talk.
Yeah, there's a raise hand button, I think.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. All right, but we're not going to talk about the whole idea today. I just wanted to introduce that because I feel like it's an important context for what we're going to talk about today. But what we're going to focus on is actually motivators. And motivators, we really align with a lot of, research folks out there and thought leaders in these topics. And one of my favorite thought leaders is Simon Sinek. And if you folks have not heard of Simon Sinek, I really highly recommend that you go and watch this whole TED Talk. I'm going to play a short clip from it just so we can get a sense of what he means by the why. But, Simon Sinek has lots of talks, lots of amazing stuff on the internet, several books. But his most famous book and his most famous TED Talk is How Great Leaders Inspire Action, when he's talking about why it's so important to know why what you do. So hopefully the sound comes through. If it doesn't, Luke, can you let me know? It's just a couple-minute clip from his famous TED Talk.
If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done. That's how most sales is done. And that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do. We say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat screen TVs. They've been making flat screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one.
All right, so that's a little clip from Simon Sinek's famous TED Talk. And it's really, what he's talking about is how it's really important for companies and leaders to know their why, to know why they do what they do. So the Indigo Motivators is a gateway into your why. I mean, obviously your why is going to be highly, highly personal, but it gives us 6 different categories that you can start thinking about. Okay, if I'm, high social, maybe my why is something about social justice or giving back or having a cause. Or high theoretical, maybe it's something about learning. Or high utilitarian, making things more efficient, or being part of this, creating an invention that creates money and creates value for all. So all of these different motivators, this is actually based on a concept in the early 1900s by a guy named Dr. Spranger. And if anyone's interested in that, I can send out more information afterwards. But we have taken that concept, and a lot of folks have actually built assessments around this, and we put it into our IndigoPathway assessment. And the focus today is going to be on, yes, what do these things mean, and how does that connect to your why? But then also know that these things also have certain biases that you want to be careful of when you're thinking about, okay, if my why is to help people, maybe I have a hidden bias towards people that don't have that same why. And by understanding that, perhaps we can actually work better together and have more diverse teams, because the different perspectives working on a problem is really where we get the best solutions. Any questions or anything to put in the chat before I move on? I want to make sure I give time for people to give feedback. We're going to explain what these mean, don't worry, in a minute. Okay, so this is a short video. This is of educators, and have a bias against Apple. Yeah, a lot of people do, actually. So that's actually interesting, and when we explain, I'll actually share with you what I think Apple's motivators are as a company, because corporate cultures actually have motivators that align to the Indigo motivators. And that might clue you in when you see your scores. Anyway, these are some high school students, and I think it's high school, college, and educators talking about their different motivators and what they mean to them. And then that'll give you a little bit of overview of what they mean. And then we're going to take some time to take the assessment just so you can get your scores, and then we'll continue on from there. But I wanted to just give you a little bit of an overview before we do that.
I always say my house never gets cleaner than when I have a paper to write. If the physical space is cluttered, my mind is also cluttered. And then once I get the physical space uncluttered, my mind begins to clear, and then I can focus on that next thing, whatever it might be.
Very family oriented. I don't like to do crazy wild things, and like if I do, it's around family, so it's all my priorities are always family oriented.
My whole life, my whole career, I've worked with kids with needs, those that don't have as much of a voice to help them get what they want, what they need. Total helper. Anything I can do for somebody, I'll try to do it.
I knew that like money was important, and that like that's how I base my decisions, because I find joy in that. I like that's cool to me when you do something and then you get compensated for it.
I really just like to learn. Like, there is really no topic that doesn't interest me. I love to just do Google searches. I love to read a variety of different books. Like, I don't have a favorite author. I don't have a favorite type of music that I listen to. I just love to learn everything there is to learn. So if you will teach me it, I will learn it, and I will teach it to someone else.
I want to work in a place that's not confining in terms of petty rules. Protecting that autonomy is very important. I don't like to be a person that works just for recognition, but I know that I do like recognition.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you a little bit of an overview. Don't worry, we're going to talk about them more. But even if you noticed while you were listening to somebody, if any bias came up, like, oh, we get a lot of teachers who listen to the utilitarian young man, and they're like, oh, I didn't really like that young man, because teachers are notoriously low utilitarian. And they start to notice their biases as we do this training, and just think about if a bias came up where, oh, I really like that person, maybe you'll share their motivators, because we tend to like people who are like us. That's like part of our neurons in our brain. So now you'll get a chance to take the assessment. After you take it, I'll show you how to take it. You'll go to a page like this. So the initial page will look like this. I'll come back here. But really, if you want to see your motivators before we start, it's the second bar down, what motivates you. And there will be all your motivators that we just talked about in order of your highest motivator to your lowest motivator. So the way to do that is you just go to IndigoPathway.com, and then you can either click on the Take Survey button, which is right up top, or you can actually put in /survey, and it'll go you directly to the assessment. I'll show you what that looks like. You either go here and click on this, and then you'll start seeing these. There's 55 questions, and do not worry, this will not put you on any mailing list. If you click the button to be on a mailing list, you'll get an email from me like every quarter. We barely ever send out emails. So don't worry, we never share our data. You can even put in a fake name if you want. But it would be great if you want to take it. We're going to pause for 10 minutes, give everyone time to take it, and then we're going to come back at, I'm just going to put myself on mute. We're going to come back at 10:05 my time. So that's 7:05 your time. And then we'll talk about the biases, and then you'll have your results. So you can see where your biases might lie. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. Hopefully most people have finished the survey. Hopefully you found it interesting. It's a new product for us. So if you do have any feedback for me, feel free to ping me in the chat, or I will share my contact information at the end. And we really want folks to use this. This is a free service. So anybody you know who you think would find this useful, please share it with them. Or if you work with students, it's just live and out there and available for everyone. So awesome. Okay, here we go. So am I still sharing my screen? I can't tell anymore. Am I still sharing my screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so you should see a screen like this, And there's a lot of really good stuff on here to go through. And if you do ever do this with your family, or if you have kids, I really recommend going through the communication page. But we're going to focus on the motivation page right now because that's the topic of this webinar. So you should be on this page if you aren't already. And on this page, you'll see at the top kind of a nickname for your top two. So we usually find that the top 2 or 3 motivators are really the most important to you. If you've got like all 50s here, you might be someone who's motivated by a lot of different things. So feel free to interpret this however makes sense to you. But for me, as you can see, the social and the individualistic are the real big ones. For me, those are my top 2. That's really important. And you also want to look at the end here and look at your lower motivators, because you tend to be favorably biased towards people who share your top motivators and companies and ideas, and unfavorably biased towards people who are opposite of you. So for me, it's utilitarian and traditional. I tend to have hidden biases against folks who are high in those areas. And of course, I'm talking in gross generalizations. Take what's useful of this that makes sense for you, but take it also with a grain of salt, because people are so diverse and so unique. But there does tend to be kind of trends with the motivators and biases. Thank you, Raul and Marvin, on your comments. I really appreciate that. So, and then if you've got some things in the middle, it tends to be like sometimes it's important to you, sometimes it's more aligned with your why, sometimes it's not. But you really want to focus in on the high and the lows, because that's where you get the most kind of like the most juice there and the most interesting information. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slideshow now. Hopefully it'll let me do that. And we're going to go through the different motivators. Okay, so the first motivator is the theoretical. Okay, so the theoretical motivator is very common in education, but really theoretical motivator is everywhere, and it's people who desire to know, right? So it's really important to these folks to have continuous intellectual challenge. If you remember the young woman on the video, she's like, I like to Google everything. There's nothing I'm not interested in. We also find that people who are theoretical either fall in one of 2 camps. They're like the young woman in the video, where they are interested in a super broad range, or they're like hyper focused in one area where they want to go super deep and they like know everything about astronomy, or they know everything about the history of the Civil War, or the history of, the Roman emperors, things like that. So the important thing to know about that, if you're high theoretical, that you just need to learn, and you love to learn, and you think learning in and of itself is a valuable pursuit. And that's important, and that's part of your why. You believe knowledge is power. And I try to avoid using the word but. And there may be some hidden biases in someone who has a high theoretical motivator. Does anyone have a guess or some comments or thoughts? If you want to pop it in the chat or raise your hand on what might be some hidden biases for those who are high theoretical. I can tell most folks aren't used to participating in these webinars, but I love to get the comments. Plus, you always come up with better things than I can come up with. Laziness, that's interesting. They hold biases against those who don't. Biases we perceive against people who are not knowledgeable and elitist. Yes, so all these things we've noticed. And one of the things we really noticed in, someone who's not graduated high school or college with educators is if a student's low theoretical and not interested in what they're interested in, they think of them as less intelligent as students who are high theoretical, who are interested and love learning for the sake of learning. Or the student that says, well, why do I need to read Shakespeare? I don't like Shakespeare. They just think, well, that kid's lazy. Someone said laziness, or that kid's not willing to work hard, but maybe they don't understand why Shakespeare connects to their motivator. And that's true also of us as adults too. My husband's really high theoretical, and he tends to think of me as kind of shallow because I'm low theoretical, and I'm not deep because I don't want to dig as deep as he does into the different information. So that's some things to keep in mind if you're high theoretical, some of your biases you might have towards people who aren't. And before you kind of write them off as not that bright, or before you start acting elitist, maybe think twice and be like, maybe they're actually a different motivator than me, and I can find some value in that. Raul says he sees this in the teacher paraprofessional dynamic or in the teacher admin dynamic. Yes, I have seen this huge. Actually, we had a literal crying, shouting, screaming match at a school once because of this dynamic. And they were like, literally the paraprofessionals were like shut out of any decision-making process in the school because of this inherent bias. And it was a real problem. Yeah. That one happened to also run against race lines too, so it made it even more difficult. Okay, the next one is utilitarian. And utilitarian is a tricky one because some people who assess for utilitarian, because this is a pretty well-known model, it's not as much money, it's more efficiency or return on investment. But when we designed IndigoPathway, because it's a much shorter assessment, you can't keep in mind the complexities, it usually is more money driven. And someone who wants a return, someone who wants to get something out of what they put in. And it doesn't mean they're necessarily money hungry, which may be one of your biases if you're a low utilitarian. But it means it's something that they really believe in a system where you need to add value, and adding value is really important. So what might be a bias of someone who's high utilitarian, and a hidden bias towards folks who aren't high utilitarian? I'm waiting for the chats to come in. So I'll give you a hint, because I used to work, when I did corporate consulting, I worked with a lot of folks in not organizers, not planners. That's part of it. I used to work with a lot of folks in Wall Street, and they just, like, if people didn't have a lot of money, they just didn't listen to them. Like, they literally were like, well, if you don't have money, you don't know how to make money, there's something wrong with you, and I'm not going to respect your opinion. And I actually think this is one of the biggest biases in America and capitalistic societies, is we tend to worship money and those who pursue that as a why and as a value. So there's a huge hidden bias there against folks. And I think that's part of the issue with teachers too, is why our society doesn't reward teachers, is teachers are low utilitarian. They're not doing it for the money. And even though everyone thinks teachers are amazing, we need teachers to get paid more, it's just not a real big push, because I think secretly there's this hidden bias that if they're willing to be a teacher, then maybe, especially if someone's really high utilitarian, then maybe they're not quite, deserving of the money. I mean, it's a very unpopular opinion, but I have heard it. It's not an opinion I share, obviously. I think teachers should make way more than people on Wall Street, but that's not the way our society is set up. Any other thoughts or comments on utilitarian? But we also tend to have biases in education towards kids who are utilitarian, and we try to get them to be more like us, and there's not a lot of options for them. And that really shows up in CTE. We find that CTE teachers are higher utilitarian than traditional teachers, and high utilitarian kids love CTE options because it's very practical. They want to learn something, they want to apply it, they want to learn how to make something with their hands, they want to get a job, they want to make money, they want to get a job faster, especially if they're low utilitarian. So we have a flip bias in education towards things that are more utilitarian focused, and we think, well, that's not as good of education, because that's a utilitarian kind of way of thinking about education. Seeing the value in philanthropy beyond tax breaks. Yes, that's another big one too. Like, what would happen to philanthropy if we didn't have tax breaks? Then that would be a really interesting economy. So a lot of just interesting things to think about. I'm going to go to the next one, aesthetic. So folks who are high aesthetic, so they're not all artists. Actually, most artists do have a high aesthetic value. So if you're on here and you're an artist, or you're a side odd artist and that's your hobby, they tend to have a high aesthetic value. I live in Boulder most of the time, and a lot of high aesthetics there who just love living in a beautiful place. They love being outside. They love doing yoga. Also, a lot of folks in environmental pursuits are high aesthetic, and they really need a beautiful place. It's important to them to be in a beautiful place and to have work-life balance and to be able to have that creative self-expression. So, what biases might hidden biases might high aesthetic folks have? Aesthetics is very subjective. Whose aesthetics are we valuing first? Yeah, so that is an interesting thing. Aesthetics are very subjective. I worked with a young man who he loved to go to New York City and take pictures of trash. And he was really high aesthetic and he found it beautiful. But I think it's just, for example, you know, my CTO, my chief technology officer, he's crazy high aesthetic. And he actually judges people's tech products based on like how pretty it looks. And I'm like, you know, even though I'm low utilitarian value, I'm much more like, well, does it help people? Does it work? You know, so I have much more grace for tech products that are ugly, but like actually work. Whereas he's very, very biased against ugly looking tech products. And Apple, for example, is a tech company that values high aesthetics, which is kind of why they tend to make things so beautiful, but it also kind of drives you crazy because it's like, well, I don't have a USB port, and why are they always changing this thing? And so the aesthetics also comes into play with Apple's quite a bit. I think some people judge high aesthetic people. We have unconscious biases towards high aesthetic people. Maybe they're too woo-woo. Maybe they're flaky. Maybe they're too sensitive. High aesthetic people tend to be very sensitive. Yes, Jose, it tends to be, if you're high aesthetic, especially if you're low utilitarian, there's beauty over practicality. That happens a lot. Aesthetic utilitarians are an interesting combo because they like it practical and beautiful. And so I actually know an engineer who's that combo, and she's amazing. Like the things she builds are incredible. Any other questions about aesthetic or comments or biases you might want to propose or ideas you might have around that? Okay, next one. Outwardly focused versus inward. Oh, that's really insightful, Tony. Yeah, also high aesthetics tend to be more inwardly focused. Well, that's an interesting point. They could be both. That has more to do with whether they're a sensor or an intuitive in Myers-Briggs. But very good point. Very intuitive. Okay, next one is traditional. So traditional, folks, I call this the wild card motivator because it really means anything, but it means you have a very, very strong sense of right and wrong, and a very strong belief system, and that is your North Star. That's how you make decisions. That's how you operate in the world, and that's what's most important to you. So for some folks, like I date myself when I put this. No kids know what this picture is. Does anyone know what this picture is? Before I tell you, you can put it in the chat. Maybe I'm just too old. I act like an old person. My husband's 65. Fiddler on the Roof. Yes, thank you, Marco. And like the famous song in Fiddler is tradition, tradition, dun 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 dun. And I have a lot of friends who are Jewish, and that's like a really important part of their culture. And I think that's why their language and their culture really has been preserved so well for thousands of years. But also my sister is Tevya is awesome. But my sister's in the Navy, and she's a career Navy person, and I've done a lot of work with veterans and folks in the military, and there is a much larger proportion of people in the military who are high traditional, and that's like the American values and that way of life and protecting that. And also, I've worked with a couple private schools that are faith-based, and for a lot of them, it's their faith. So traditional is very diverse, but there tends to be some common hidden biases with traditional as well. So any ideas on what some biases might be to folks who are very high traditional? Possible thinking those who are traditional are out of touch with reality. Yes, that is definitely a big one. Questionable. I don't know what that means, Tony. Maybe you can elaborate. Forced assimilation has pushed us to be more protective. Yes. Yeah, I actually think high traditional is a really good thing in a lot of the underrepresented populations. Like I love it when we work on the Navajo reservation and I see kids who are high traditional, because it's like, please, be protective of your customs, because we want to preserve those. Questioning new things that are new or innovative. Yes, so that is a bias of the high traditional folks. Tony said that. We've noticed that with schools, sometimes where they have a really high percentage of teachers who are high traditional, they're kind of resistant to new things coming into education. They went to education because they like it the way it is, or they have very strong beliefs about it and they don't like it to be changed. So, again, this is all just discussion and food for thought, thinking about your own biases and biases of others who have different motivators, because this plays so much into human dynamics. Even politics right now, both sides are high traditional, but for very different belief systems, and they've kind of lost their way on trying to solve the problems because they're like entrenched in their narratives right now. Okay, good questions. Thank you for all of the comments that are coming in. For those of you who are sending in the chat to hosts and panelists, if you want everyone to see it, feel free to put it on everyone. If you only want us to see it, continue to keep it going to hosts and panelists. I know we're running out of time. Well, I thought I'd have so much time here. Okay, individualistic. We'll end on time. Don't worry. This one is desiring freedom, wanting to. A lot of performers are high individualistic. That's why I have Beyonce there. But also it can just be someone who wants to lead, someone who wants to be in control of their own destiny. A lot of entrepreneurs are high individualistic. They need choices. Kids who are high individualistic really need choices. They hate being told what to do. They hate being micromanaged. And if you're an introvert, you might not want public recognition, but you'd still want to have a project that you can completely own. So any quick comments on biases for high individualistic? Selfish or self-centered? Yes, especially those who like the recognition. People think of them as being selfish or needing too much attention. Like, why do you need to be so out there? And they perform a lot too. Any other thoughts on biases? A lot of, with kids and teachers, people think the kids are difficult to deal with. They're a pain in the butt. They're entitled, right? Because they have to have choice. They're loners, yeah, for the really independent ones. Thank you, Tony, for saying that. Some of them think they're loners or they're not good at working on a team. And the high individualistic folks, a lot of their inherent biases is, why would anyone want to be a lemming? Why would anyone not want to stand out? Why would anyone want to be a follower? So again, lots of interesting ways to think about motivators and bias. And the last one, egotistical, overly ambitious. Yes, all of these things are true. Is social, which is wanting to be of service. And this is a really easy one to explain. It's just people who want to make a difference in people's lives. They usually have a cause. Maybe it's homelessness, maybe it's education, maybe it's social justice, maybe it's critical race theory. But what are some biases for and against high social folks? If you're high social towards others, or if you're not high social? So I'm high social, and I actually am really biased towards people who say they're bored. So I'm like, how are you bored? There are so many problems to solve in the world, and all of them will take 100 lifetimes to solve. So just do something. Pick a problem and solve it. They're a bleeding heart and they need to take care of their own house first. Yes, Marvin. A lot of people feel like those high social people always trying to help, not dealing with their own life. Yep. Any other thoughts or comments? Only think of themselves. Yes, Marco. High social people tend to think of people who aren't high social sometimes as selfish. And by the way, if you're low social, it doesn't mean that you don't like helping people. It probably means, though, the way that you help people is either people that are really close to you, or it's in service of one of your other motivators. It's for a different reason. Okay. Well, so I think you guys are kind of getting the point of all the motivators and the biases. This time went by way faster than I thought I would. So I just want to put my contact information up there if you guys want to contact me, and I want to leave the last 3 minutes for questions. Rosa says thank you. Any questions? I went through this really fast. No questions, huh? Thank you. So one of the things I do want to point out, just since no one has any questions, I wanted to make sure I could answer questions, but since I have like 1 more minute, that what we found is actually it's really, really interesting to have people with different motivators on the same team. And so if you're thinking about pulling together a team of folks at your work or for a project, really, you have this free resource. You can have people take the assessment, or you can just guess what people's motivators are, because really it's so helpful having people coming at this. Yes, that's me with the doggy. This is my little team here. Coming at it from different perspectives and different whys. And if you guys can all agree on the bigger vision, having people coming at it just like everything else with more diversity, bringing their biases and everything, but being able to talk about it and being open about it always makes a better team. So that's what we're here about at Indigo, is honoring everyone's whys, honoring everyone's motivators and behavioral styles, but for the bigger picture of really making a better world, and helping people know that they're loved and they have purpose. So know that you're loved and you have purpose, and I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much. Oh, Marco has one question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So what does a practical application of understanding bias look like in a business environment?
In a business environment?
Yes.
So I used to teach and do this with business teams. So just really talking about your bias and how that impacts your productivity at work. So for example, I used to work with metals executives who were almost always high individualistic, high utilitarian. So they were always like, let's cut the biggest deal, let's negotiate on the metal, and let me beat my chest and get all the reward for it. But their executive assistants were usually women who were high social, so they were trying to help these dudes out, even though they were usually jerks to them. And, another motivator, it was really random, the other motivator. And so they couldn't see, so first of all, the women tended over time to resent the men. And then the men couldn't see how actually these women really cared about them and how valuable they were to the organization and them getting what they wanted. So a practical opportunity is to just talk about it and share where people were coming from and help each other to value the different motivators more. Did that help, Marco, or was that too shallow of an answer? Thanks. Okay. Mainly to have a conversation. It's always about conversation. Cool. Any other questions? Also, Marco, another way to do this in a company is to think about your corporate culture and to think about, which motivators does your corporate culture reward And are people in the right jobs? First of all, do they match your corporate culture? And then are they the right jobs where their motivators can be fed? Because that reduces attrition. And we did a lot of work hiring salespeople for a sales job that wasn't it wasn't a hunter kind of sales job. It was like a long-term sales for a record storage company. And we couldn't have straight utilitarians because they wouldn't stay around and they were losing 80% of their people. And when we tweaked the motivator profile to bring in people with different motivators, we actually were able to flip that retention rate around to 80% retention. Is there a book about these motivators? So if you, actually, I have a book. I don't know if anyone has the mailing list. I can send out a link to it digitally. But you can also on the website, when you took IndigoPathway, there's a little video about each one. And I think there's a link to a resource section that has more information about each motivator as well. Okay. How does this help you if you're a change agent? I think how it helps you is just really getting clear about your motivators as a change agent and what your biases might be and how that might be impacting the way you're trying to do your work. Any last comments or questions? Now we're 2 minutes over, but I think I did pretty good with the time. All right. Awesome. Well, feel free to contact me if you have any other questions or comments. I'll send some info to Ken to send out to you all as a follow-up. And thanks so much.